Hey y'all, welcome back to our series on common mistakes authors make when pitching podcasts and how to fix them. This is Book Marketing Mania, and I'm your host, Kim Stewart. And last week, we talked about the common mistake of just waiting for hosts to invite you to be a guest on their show and how to fix it by proactively pitching yourself to podcast. So now you're ready to start pitching yourself, or perhaps you've been pitching podcasts for a while, but you're not seeing the return you thought you would. Maybe you're thinking it's a waste of your valuable resources of time and money. Not to mention, it can drag down your mental state, right, about marketing your book, especially if you're only hearing back no's or even crickets from podcast hosts. So today, let's talk about common podcast pitching mistake number 2, pitching without a plan, and I'll share how you can fix or avoid that mistake in the future. So let's get to it. So when we start pitching to guests on podcast, if we start our outreach to podcast hosts without a plan in mind, we won't get anywhere fast and we'll get frustrated and often we give up. So we need a podcast pitching plan, or better yet, a podcast pitching strategy. And there's 3 benefits to having a strategy that I want to share today. One is a strategy helps you use your resources wisely, whether that's your own time or your money to outsource podcast pitching. And number 2, a strategy helps you measure your ROI, the return of investment on your time and money as you pitch podcast. Then number 3, a strategy helps you if you are outsourcing your podcast pitching to your VA. That way your VA will know your goals, the type of shows you want to guest on, and the topics you want to talk about. And that way they won't be wasting your resources either. So how can a podcast pitching strategy help you fix or avoid the common mistake of pitching without a plan? Well, it helps you become clear on your why, your who, your what, and your where. And that's what makes up your podcast pitching strategy. So first off, your why, those are your goals. Like, what are you trying to accomplish as a podcast guest? Because it's so easy as authors to think, I just want to sell books, right? But there's so much more to it. You might be growing your email list. You might be building your author platform. You might be growing your own podcast. You might be wanting to establish a relationship with other podcast hosts that happen to also be authors. And oh my gosh, that is what I've heard the biggest return from my clients is it's not necessarily the return on book sales. It's the return on the relationship that they build with podcast hosts that go on, and they have these amazing collaborations that come out of it. So just be sure to think about your why in the very beginning. What do you hope to accomplish out of being a guest on podcasts? Because knowing your why, your goals, will help you measure the ROI of the time and money you spend on podcast pitching. And then next is your who, and that's your target audience. Like, who are you trying to reach? Who is your message for? And then next up is your what, and that's your topics. What topics are you going to pitch? Because you definitely want to have those in your pitch template when you get ready to send it to a host. So don't put the work on them to come up with what to talk about. Go ahead and share. These are the topics that I'm an expert on, and I think they would bring great value to your listeners. So make a list of your what, which is your topics. And then finally, it's your where. What types of shows are you pitching? Like, are you only pitching Christian shows? Are there certain niches you want to reach? Like, do you only reach moms? It's really important to know the audience that you're trying to reach. So what types of shows are you pitching? And to meet the goals you've set for podcast pitching, you want to be sure you're pitching the right shows. And so if you're outsourcing, top of your list for the right shows are the ones that are releasing episodes consistently, they're current, and of course, that they interview guests. So putting together those 4 things, your why, your who, your what, and your where, makes up your podcast pitching strategy that helps you or your VA then turn around and do the research and get pitches out the door so you can get those yeses. And you'll have a plan to follow that helps you meet your podcast pitching goals, so you won't make the mistake of pitching without a plan. And if you want to dig a little deeper, tune in to episode 32 on putting together your podcast pitching strategy, and I'll put a link to it here in your player. And I hope you're enjoying the series. Be sure to follow the show in your podcast player so you don't miss an episode, because next week we're going to tackle common podcast pitching mistake number 3, cold pitching the masses. I can't wait. See you then.